Ezra Bridger is a Jedi Padawan and Spectre 6 of the Ghost Crew. Throughout the series Star Wars Rebels, he became loved by fans for his good heart and his caring spirit. Watching him grow from an Aladdin-type thief to a capable leader and Jedi is an integral part to Star Wars Rebels. The hero's journey is a story structure that many stories, if examined, follow. Some steps may be skipped or even appear in a slightly different order, but generally this pattern is followed. It should also be noted that the hero's journey can be cyclic, especially in the context of a series rather than a single movie or book. The 12 steps to the hero's journey are the ordinary world, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, the meeting with the mentor, crossing the first threshold, tests, allies, and enemies, the approach, the ordeal, the reward, the road back, the resurrection hero, and the return with elixir. Most of the beginning stages of Ezra's hero's journey occur during the pilot, Spark of Rebellion, with the more middle parts occurring throughout the rest of the series. Ezra's hero's journey is missing the final steps, as Ezra's story is likely far from over. It's also important to note that in a story like this, the hero's journey can be highly based on one's interpretation of the story. Some people may see certain parts of Ezra's journey in a different order, or the steps happening at different times than the ones included here. This is just one way that Ezra's hero's journey can be viewed in Star Wars Rebels. Ezra's hero's journey, like many, begins with the ordinary world. When we first meet Ezra, he's a kid on the streets of Lothal City. He's a common thief and pickpocket, and although he's not as selfless as he later becomes, he still clearly has a good heart. He had an ordinary life, untouched by anything considered supernatural. He thieves during the day, and then goes home to his collection of stolen helmets and other stolen Imperial items. Next, however, comes the meeting with the mentor. This isn't usually the second step, but in Ezra's case it is. Ezra has many mentor figures throughout the series, such as Hera, Hondo, Rex, and Ahsoka, but Kanan is clearly the biggest mentor he has. He first sees Kanan in a moment where the Force calls to both of them, but neither do much about it. It's when Ezra steals the speeders that they had tried to steal that Kanan, along with Sabine and Zeb, really take notice of him. A run-in with Imperials leads to Ezra escaping with the crew of the Ghost. Kanan doesn't really want to take Ezra in, but Hera does. Eventually, Kanan warms up to Ezra, but not until after Ezra accepts the call to adventure. Ezra's call to adventure is actually quite literal. The Force actually calls him to Kanan's lightsaber and holocron that are hidden in his room. Kanan catches him and takes the lightsaber. However, Ezra is able to sneak the holocron away from Kanan and later manages to open it in an Imperial cell. He has another call though, and that's when Hera is trying to get him to join the crew to help others. This is where Ezra's refusal of the call occurs. He doesn't want to go on adventures and fight the Empire with them. Even after they rescue him and the Wookiees, he is taken home by the Ghost Crew. At the end of Spark of Rebellion, however, he steals the lightsaber from Kanan once again and takes it home. Kanan goes to Ezra's tower and offers to take him in and train him as a Jedi. Ezra finally accepts the call to adventure and becomes Spectre 6. Ezra then crosses the first threshold into adventure. Technically, Ezra first begins his adventure before he even accepts the call, as he goes to space and helps the Ghost Crew for the first time in Spark of Rebellion, so you could count that as crossing the threshold. You could also count the episode Droids in Distress as crossing the threshold, as it's his first mission as an official member of the Ghost Crew. However, Ezra crossing that first threshold into supernatural adventure, which is what crossing the threshold often means in stories, is in the episode Path of the Jedi. Before this episode, Ezra has some Jedi lessons with Kanan and run-ins with Force sensitives and Force-related things before, but it's in this episode that he's really plunged into the Force. His adventure includes tests of character through visions provided by the Force and getting guidance from Yoda himself. It's in this episode that he receives the crystal that he uses to build his lightsaber, and his journey as a Jedi begins here. The next step is where Ezra faces tests, allies, and enemies. This step, as in nearly all stories, is the longest one. Ezra faced many tests both before and after his journey as a Jedi starts. Before he crosses the threshold, he has several tests, the most key being to learn forgiveness and overcome his fear of the truth. After he crosses the threshold, he's tested many more times. Most significantly, he's tested to overcome his fear of lost and trust issues, as well as he's tested to become more and more selfless throughout the series. Ezra also has many allies throughout his journey to help him along the way. The most significant ones are Kanan, Hera, Chopper, Zeb, and Sabine, but also Ahsoka, Rex, and others in the Rebellion. Ezra's kind heart and good nature also finds him trusting less honorable characters like Maul and Hondo. These allies all play different but still important roles in shaping Ezra's journey as well as who he becomes by the end of the series. Ezra's enemies change throughout the series. As one is defeated, more pop back up in their place. In Season 1, his main villain is the Grand Inquisitor, with characters like Agent Kallus also being bothersome. Tarkin also becomes a menace, but his role is minimal in directly impacting the crew and Ezra. After Kanan defeats the Grand Inquisitor and Minister Tuwa is killed, new Inquisitors appear, the fifth brother and the seventh sister. Both new Inquisitors follow Ezra and Kanan throughout the second season, as well as Vader making occasional appearances, although he winds up more focused on Ahsoka Tano. There's also the eighth brother who tries his best. After the second season ends, the fifth brother and the seventh sister are dead, and Vader has learned his lesson and no longer follows them, which gives Grand Admiral Thrawn an opportunity to become the main villain of the last two seasons, along with Governor Pryce and Darth Maul. It's at the end of the second season where Ezra faces the approach step of his journey, where major setbacks occur and he has to change his way of viewing and going about things. The setback of Ezra's journey happens on Malachor in Twilight of the Apprentice. Ezra has a narrow run-in with Darth Vader, loses his lightsaber, and as far as he knows, loses Ahsoka as well. Kanan is blinded by Maul, and Ezra blames himself. After Twilight of the Apprentice, Ezra begins handling his missions in a different way. He's become angrier and feels as though he doesn't need Kanan anymore. He turns to the Sith holocron for guidance, which makes his missions much different. He's more violent and using the Force for things that start to pull him into the dark side. He's more commanding and even disrespectful with other members of his team. This approach doesn't last long, and once Kanan takes the holocron away from him and stops distancing himself from the crew, Ezra returns back to his normal self, but not quite. He's definitely changed with a new outlook. He's more mature and grounded, and he's overcome many of the fears he had when he was younger. After the approach comes the ordeal, which is a major hurdle or obstacle in the hero's journey. Ezra, of course, faces many ordeals, but the biggest one is at the end of the series, where he sends himself into hyperspace with Grand Admiral Thrawn to save Lothal and his family. After this ordeal, we don't really know what happens to Ezra, but the 4 steps left in the hero's journey tell us that Ezra's journey hasn't come to an end yet, especially since Sabine Wren and Ahsoka Tano are on their way to find him. The next steps of the journey are the reward, where the hero accomplishes their goal, which, arguably, Ezra has done by saving Lothal. Then, there's the road back, where they return to their ordinary life, the resurrection hero, where they're faced with the final test, and the return with the elixir, where they bring back something they've obtained to the ordinary world so they can help others. There's no telling exactly where Ezra's journey is going to go from here, as Dave Filoni likes to keep us on our toes, but we can theorize based on what we do know about both Ezra, his story, and the hero's journey as a concept. Ezra Bridger is an incredible character. Viewers of Rebels watch change and grow throughout the whole show. Fans saw him grow into a selfless young man and were right with him through the rougher patches of his life as well as his triumphs, and were probably yelling at their TV when he was making mistakes, even though he learned valuable lessons from all of them. We've watched him form both deep and meaningful relationships as well as make enemies. His journey isn't over yet, but when it is, he will be greatly missed by characters both in the Star Wars universe and the people out of it.